Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's 2 weeks now since the end of the FIP Congress, and we're back. Over the last 2 months, we've been exploring different aspects of media revenue as part of this masterclass series that we're presenting in association with our friends and partners at Mather Economics. You're going to hear more from them a bit later on. In August and September's sessions, we've explored acquisition and engagement, hearing from some fantastic experts, and I'm delighted that we've got 2 more fantastic experts to join us for this final session, which is focused, of course, on retention. I think that's enough from me, though. I'm going to hand over to our host for today's session, who's going to introduce our guests. It is, of course, Martha Williams. So over to you, Martha.
Well, hi, James, and thank you for that. We are so thrilled to be able to close out our series of masterclasses on subscription strategies with a great group of speakers today, and the largest group of registrants that we've had so far. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speakers and our topics for today. And I think that you're going to find that you're going to learn a whole lot about retention and how to shape your own retention strategy going forward. So today we have panelists that will speak in the following order. First, Selma Stern, who's the SVP for Consumer Subscriptions at the Business Insider, and she is based in Berlin. Claire Overstall is the SVP of Global Head of Customer for the Economist Group in London. And Dr. Matt Lindsay is President of Mather Economics based in Atlanta in the United States. First, we're going to talk about pricing strategy optimization and price elasticity, something that we've been getting questions on in a big way throughout this entire series. It's, of course, top of mind for everyone. Also, building teams to drive retention across the media organization. It's not just the marketing department, it's not just the data department, it's not just the editorial department, it's everybody working together. We're going to talk about increasing engagement as part of retention, retention campaigns tactics, churn propensity modeling, and last but not least, retaining the COVID cohort. So let's get started. Let's start with Selma. And I wanted to warmly introduce Selma Stern from the Business Insider. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you for the introduction. I will just start by very briefly introducing Business Insider as a brand and as a subscription brand. So we are actually the largest business news site in the United States. Fun little calculation that we did once is we saw that it took us around 10 years to build the kind of audience that a lot of competitors took 80 years to build. So it was absolutely rapid growth in the last 13 years, which brought us to a truly unique position in terms of the reach that we have as a brand. We have 24% of our readers are international, and we're really targeting a kind of decision maker audience. Also, of course, with our subscription product. Now, Business Insider as a company has been around for a good 13 years now, I think, whereas our subscriptions product is only about 3 years old. And it was quite a success story. It was launched roughly 3 years ago when Business Insider was still very much reliant on advertising revenue, and advertising revenue almost exclusively. That has now branched out. That has changed dramatically in our company, and consumer subscriptions has turned out to be, as you all know, a very fast growing, but also a very kind of economically attractive revenue model, because it's not quite as volatile as some other revenue streams. So that said, with Business Insider being a news brand that grew very rapidly, we went into this subscriptions product as a kind of an acquisition-minded organization. And now with the tremendous growth that we've seen this year, with the ambitious growth plans that we've set for next year and for the year to come, and with the COVID bump that I'm sure everyone on this call has experienced in some way or another, retention management has obviously come center stage. So I've invested a good part of this year in kind of building capabilities for retention management. So in this limited time today, I would like to share just a couple of thoughts with you on what matters for retention management and how to, and what I think is important when you start thinking about this, when you start building a retention management system, if you will, within your company. I'll talk a little bit about, and Martha alluded to this earlier, about the organizational aspect of retention, because it truly is something that cuts across all functions. Secondly, I'll talk about what kind of insights you might be looking for in retention analytics, which is quite a complex undertaking and something that you can develop to an amazing level of granularity over the years. But I'll try to give you a perspective on where to start, basically. And then lastly, I would like to share a few examples, what I call tools here, a few examples of retention or churn mitigation initiatives that we ran this year. Some of them worked very well, others didn't, and I'd like to share some of these tangible examples with you. Now, organizationally, we found that retention is something that you need to think about in terms of functional teams, but also in terms of cross-functional collaboration. So on the left side here, you see our kind of classic org chart, our classic functional teams, if you will, on edit, on the product and engineering side, and on the business side. This year, we've started building out specific retention teams or retention specialists on a number of different teams, on product and engineering, on the business intelligence side, and on the marketing side. However, we realized, and the examples that I'm going to share later are going to illustrate that quite well, I think. No single retention initiative can be run by one single team only. So we found it was critically important to kind of establish a cross-functional team. I think the New York Times calls these things missions, to really work on a business goal from all of these different angles. In terms of insights, I think there are two levels to this. The first perspective I'd like to share here is, if you're thinking about churn, there's really one pretty simple exercise that you can do that is critically important. We looked at some of the emails that customers sent us, explaining, or we asked them why they wanted to cancel, and then we grouped the responses in these 6 different categories that you see here on the left. Some said it's too expensive, or I want to save that money. Others said I don't use it enough, or I only wanted to read that one article that I signed up for, and so on and so forth. I think when thinking about churn management or retention, because there is no silver bullet here, because it's just ideally a huge number of small initiatives that will then add up to a meaningful difference in the numbers, it's really important to look at what portion of churn you can actually address here. One thing to note is I'm not focusing on involuntary churn here, i.e. credit card failures. That's something that's quite separate, and that I think Claire will address in a little bit. But in terms of voluntary cancellations, there are a couple of things that you can do with onboarding series, for example, kind of communicating the value of your product. There are things that you can do in the long term, improve your personalization, for example. Make sure that that those who say I didn't get the relevant articles, or I just wanted that one article, that you make sure that you actually deliver content to them that is relevant to them if you have it. In part, if you understand who your customers really are, partnerships can really help drive retention if you offer a value proposition beyond the articles that you produce, and so forth. And then there's just a kind of a category of churn that is extremely hard to address, and I'll show an example later where we actually tried and failed, and that's a type of churn management that that I don't think we will focus on a lot in the future. And now here's a snapshot of the kind of meaty churn analytics that we've built a dedicated team to do now. And the point I would like to make here is, this is very, very detailed stuff, and I could show you tons of different retention curves for all kinds of cohorts. But I think the overarching point here is that looking at monthly churn, as we all tend to do because it's easy and that's the number that people talk about, is almost meaningless, to be honest, because there are so many factors that have nothing to do with your user's behavior, your user's relationship to your product, that determine what that overall churn number looks like, right? So on the left side here, these are retention curves for our users who are on a monthly term, on an annual term, and on a 2-year term. Now, this monthly curve looks the way it does because we have a $1 trial that we offer to everyone across the board. If we got rid of that, churn would drop dramatically, but would that be an economically sound decision? I'm not sure. This is something that we need to test, but it influences that overall churn number, which we need to take apart a little bit in order to really get to the details. And the other two examples here, I just wanted to show how dramatically retention varies depending on the particular cohort you look at. This in the middle, hit articles, this is kind of last click conversions on hit articles that generated tons of subs. Some of them had a very low share of annual subscribers, so they didn't stick around for a very long time. On the right is pretty stark differences between content verticals that we're seeing. And I could go into a lot more detail here, but I'll skip to the tools section of this presentation. So I wanted to show you 4 examples of things that we did to mitigate churn. One is an onboarding series, an email onboarding series that we launched in June this year that actually made a very positive difference that really compounds over time. So what we're seeing a clear difference between cohorts that got this and cohorts that didn't. And this email that I highlighted here, what we call the value email, where we communicate to our users what they're actually getting. This one had stellar open rates and a very good effect on retention. Another tool that we're using regularly is to discount our annual price. On the left here, you see a couple of promotions that we ran, and then this is the paywall that is currently running with an introductory offer on the annual price. And what this does is when we run these campaigns, we try to do it very selectively, not to ruin our price point of $99, but the annual share really shoots up in these during these campaigns, and that really helps retention. We also, and this is new, and this is based on the likelihood to churn modeling that we actually got much better at this year. We're now trying to show users and some kind of an intervention when they actually show the intent to churn. So this graphic on this modal on the left here fires when someone clicks on my account, because we're assuming that when you click my account, it's very likely that you have the intention to cancel. And then this email from Henry Blodgett goes out every time someone turns off the auto renew toggle in their account. And this has actually, as you see on the right here, produced quite significant results. Now, this is the example that did not work. We had a massive hit story with 4-digit last click conversions just on this particular article, which was almost unheard of. And then we thought, what can we do with this cohort? Because 1 month later, we wanted to mitigate that massive churn that would follow 1 month later. And we extended their trial. We offered them, depending on their particular price sensitivity that we got from this, the likelihood to churn scoring, we offered them a very good deal, $1 a month or $4.95 a month, which we usually never do. This did absolutely not work. And I think the reason for that is, which is what I was saying earlier, when someone tells you explicitly they just want that one article and they paid that $1 to read that one article, then it's very, very hard to get these people back. And I would like to close just by saying that at the end of the day, yes, retention management is a very kind of technical and analytical undertaking, and there are a lot of very detailed things that you can do. But it does help to have a deeper look at who these people are, who your loyal users actually are. Like, what do the demographics look like? Why do they actually subscribe? We asked our users why they subscribed, and we came up with all these different reasons that we thought might be the one. And then most 25% of them just said, it's just the content, it's just the articles. I just want to read your stuff because I like it. And really ultimately that's what it comes down to. So 3 conclusions here. It's really important to build dedicated capabilities and dedicated teams for this because it's so complex. Focus on what you can address and not necessarily on the churn that is very hard to mitigate, and really test as much as possible because there is no one solution that will make a massive difference, but there are a lot of small solutions that will each make a difference, and then in some help your retention management.
My question to you would be, obviously churn is your biggest hurdle, as you said, but if you had to give some advice to magazine media, to news media out there who are participating today about their own struggles with retention, what would you say is second to churn would be another thing that you really need to pay attention to be successful in retaining customers?
Mm-hmm. I would stress what I said in my closing remarks, that you really need to look at different customer segments and not treat your readers as this monolithic block that are all the same and that all churn for the same reasons, because they really don't. And there are parts of this churn equation that are much easier to address than others. And in order to get to that information and to get to these insights, I think building, if you can only hire one person for this, I would say hire a data scientist who can really dig deep and figure out what these different segments are, because that really helps.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do you address this with data and artificial intelligence in order to address the masses, but on an individual level?
Yes, so we build, well, I'm not sure if I would call it artificial intelligence. We're still relying on natural intelligence very much, but it's definitely something, and that's kind of the beauty of it. You can get better and better at it, and there's almost no end. Like you can become very granular at this and use very sophisticated data modeling. But the important thing is to get started and to build a framework, and then you can grow it from there.
Terrific. Now I do have one very specific question from Stephanie in the audience, and so I'm going to ask it here. Could you tell us more on how cohorts are defined, and are they based on the last click attribution?
Yeah, that's a very important question. For now, we are, so when we look at, let me put it this way, the conversion source is just one aspect of this segmentation into cohorts. So we do look at, for instance, when we looked at the effectiveness of our paid acquisition, for example, we saw the cost per acquisition that were coming in all these different platforms, but then also a couple of months into it, we looked at retention for these different cohorts, and then the picture actually changed, because we saw that users or subscribers we had acquired through LinkedIn, for instance, were much stickier and really liked our content, which is not surprising if you think about it as a business publication. But I think there are a couple more aspects to this. There's industry verticals, or what we call industry verticals. I guess it would be sections in a broader general interest newspaper. There are big differences there. There's voluntary and involuntary churn. There's payment method. Interestingly, there are differences in payment method. There are even differences when you look at the device type. So for some reason, our iOS users tend to be stickier and less price sensitive than Android users. So it's a vast array of types of cohorts that you can look at.
Well, thank you so much, Selma. We really appreciate all of your great insights. We're going to have more questions at the end for you. In fact, they're starting to come in again, but we're going to move on to the next speaker, and then we'll have some Q&A later on. So with that, I would love to introduce Claire Overstrahl, who's the SVP of the Economist Group regarding customers. And so I'm going to pass it over to Claire. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Martha, and thanks, Selma. That is a whistle-stop tour, and I'm going to inevitably repeat some of the same findings, I'm sure, that we have had. So everybody knows the Economist. We are obviously a global publication of more than just economics, and we have a weekly newspaper, which I think is the bit that everybody knows and understands. But we also publish digitally daily and via newsletters and podcasts, and that kind of digital aspect to The Economist is something that I'll come on to a little bit later in terms of how important that is to our future and to making sure that our customers understand us as more than just a weekly newspaper. So I wanted to quickly kind of touch on the fact that we've been a subscription business for a long time, and we're obviously a very well-established news publication. With that comes its challenges. So I think as much as Selma was talking about having only really had a subscription business for the last few years, that in itself is both a good and a bad thing, in the same way that having a legacy business that has been around for a long time also comes with both pros and cons. But certainly we've been growing our audience for years now, and our great circulation numbers can be attributed quite heavily to our acquisition strategy. But of course, acquisition can only take you so far. And so last year, as of last year really, we began to focus a lot more heavily on retention and what needed to happen there. So the first thing we did, so it's worth saying that the retention team as a whole had existed in marketing for a little while, but was broadened out last year. I came on board last year, and I think we've taken the team to nearly double its size now. And exactly to Selma's point, data and the data scientists and analysts that surround the core kind of retention team are super important there. But really, kind of when we went back to the very beginning on all of this, we kind of looked at the four main pillars of retention. Kind of how do you even begin to think about retention as a challenge? I think that is, those of us that are involved in retention, we kind of like this. It is just less simple than acquisition. It is less, you do this thing and one person comes in and great, tick, done. This is, retention is way more complicated than that, and you really need to kind of think quite strategically about how you're going to think about that challenge. So the way that kind of we've sketched it out strategically is in 4 pillars. So the first one, again, echoing Selma, is really to understand your customers. Segment them as much as you can, understand who they are, think about lookalikes, think about how that behavior is replicated in those different cohorts. And then most of all, think about what you want to do with it. So it's all well and good kind of knowing what your customers are doing and what they are telling you, but it's really important to know what you are then going to do with it. It isn't just kind of understanding people's likelihood to renew, for example. That's great, that's useful, but you can't act on it. Understanding the flip, understanding people's likelihood to churn, is something that you can act on. And then understanding your engagement levers. So say, for example, your customers tell you that you're too expensive. What can you do about that? Can you change your price? Maybe, but maybe that actually affects your margins too much, and maybe you can't. But you can probably add value. You can probably add more things into the subscription that make the expense worthwhile. And that's a different way of kind of framing the problem and answering the question. And ultimately here, this is all about engagement. And I'll come back to engagement time and time again, really, in this presentation. But ultimately your value for your customer is always going to be driven by how much they are engaging with your product. You know, I think we all use Netflix and Spotify and all of the major kind of tech subscriptions, but would you use those if you genuinely didn't listen to music? If you weren't engaging with Spotify, no, you'd cancel your subscription regardless of how much you felt like you had to have it. The third part here, I'll come on to in a little bit more detail, but you've got to work out where you are going to focus in the life cycle. So you have your subscribers that come on, and you have a lot of them. So in terms of a retention funnel, which is obviously a little bit of a slightly different concept to an acquisition funnel, you will have a lot of people joining you. You'll have a lot of trialists coming in at the top. And by the time you're at mature customers, there's obviously far fewer of them, but they're more valuable. So you have to work out where you want to place your focus. Retention necessarily has limited resources, limited amounts of people and money, and you have to decide kind of whether you want to focus on that early life or whether you want to focus on your more expensive customers to replace should they leave. And then finally, and actually, whilst I have this as number 4, I'll start with it in my examples because it's one of the ones that we thought we could attack straight away in phase 1 of our improving retention, is really to think about kind of your lifetime value. Really think about who you're bringing in. Who are these customers? Are they even the right people for you? Do they match what your mature base looks like? And are you explaining your proposition well enough that by the time they're in and in that trial, they are going to stay because they understand what they've bought. So good retention starts with acquisition, and that finishes the loop really. And again, I'll come on to this, that makes it not just about the retention team. And then finally, and it's a little bit small on this slide, but I can't really underplay how important this is, but data and research and reporting is absolutely paramount to everything, let alone having the marketing kind of tech infrastructure to be able to speak to your customers, know what they're doing, and respond as quickly as possible. Okay, so I think we're all fairly familiar. This is a slightly more dramatic version of Selma's curves, I think. This is kind of our overall base. And this really was where we started at the beginning by addressing kind of pillar number 3 of where do we start here? We've got problems in various different areas, but where do we want to start? And by looking at this curve, we kind of said that the most important thing was to attack the beginning. If you can shallow out this curve, then the longer tail of it simply is higher. There are more people with you, and so you'll have made more of a difference. Also, The Economist has a long tenured, the longer tenured base is good, it is loyal, and it wasn't our major problem area. So we went right back to the beginning and kind of separated our focus into the initial experience that a customer has with us, and then the in-life experience, and built 2 teams around that, an onboarding team and an in-life team. And then I'm not going to dwell too much on this because it's almost exactly what Selma said, but it is, again, it is so important for your whole business to understand that they have a part to play in this. And especially in news, I think one of the first things that I did was befriend the editorial team. Editorial are your product. They write your product. They are everything that your readers, they are your whole raison d'etre. So it is really important that they understand your reporting, they understand your numbers, and that they are bought into how we can make this initial experience better, how we can make this in-life experience better. And creating that cross-functional team across product, marketing, editorial, data was one of the first things we did. And then we split out kind of where we wanted to focus between, as I said, that initial experience, in-life experience, quick wins. And it is, again, worth saying that with all of this, the focus was on digital. So phase one was about sorting the basics. I've got a few different examples here of what we have done, but conscious of time, I will just rattle through them and maybe we can come back if there are any questions at the end. But one of the first things that we did was rethink about how we acquire people and how we are explaining who we are to new customers. So there are two things in here. The first thing that we did, which actually coincided really nicely with with COVID, was we added digital into every package we sold. So we removed the ability for you to buy print only. Now that does two things. A, it addresses the added value part that I already mentioned, but also it makes your customer trackable. If I have a customer, if I have two customers on the base, one who has received 51 issues of The Economist landing on their doormat and has not opened a single one, versus a customer who has had 51 issues and has opened them all and read them cover to cover, as the retention person, I have no idea which one of those is going to retain better. I have no idea who is going to take the action the next week to make sure that they are going to retain. So adding digital in just gives you another layer of insight into what your customers are reading, when they're reading it, and then from that you can build whole engagement strategies around that. So we included digital in every subscription. And then the second thing we did, which was slightly more controversial, I think, certainly internally, it took a lot of courage, I think, to get rid of this. We have been known for the 12 for 12 offer for some time. And we felt that whilst retention was improving, and sorry, what I should have said was that this graph is our trialist conversion rate. So what you can see happening right up until July is that it is gently improving, right? We introduced a new onboarding series, we introduced welcome packs to new subscribers, but in July we turned off 12 for 12. And by doing that, we essentially doubled the introductory price for a new subscriber. And what you can then see happen 12 weeks later is the retention rate jumped by around 6 percentage points. The important thing here, of course, is it's about net growth. What did it do to acquisition? Did we lose people coming in at the beginning because the intro offer was so much more expensive? And I'm pleased to say we didn't, and that was the big fear. Would we get better retention, but in exchange for worse acquisition? And we didn't. So for us, this has been a net positive move. And I think it's really important. We have said that a quarter is worth more than £12. And so we've immediately got our consumers understanding the value of our product from the very beginning. However, it is worth saying there's a lot more testing to be done. You can't just, I think everybody on this call will know that you can't just stick with one intro offer. And to Selma's point earlier, not all customers are the same. So we need to be definitely thinking about bringing different customers on with different intro offers depending on who they are and their propensity to pay. So this is our one that didn't really work, but is worth testing and something that we're definitely going to want to look at a little bit more. So we introduced retrying payments. When I joined, we didn't retry. When your payment failed, that was it. You went into our bounce series and we tried to essentially win you back. But that win back took place before your actual expiry, before your renewal. What we did was we introduced a couple of payment retries before you went into that bounce series. And it recovered around 7 to 8%, but critically, it didn't change the overall recovery rate. Our bounce series was just as effective as retrying people's payment. What this did though, was it made it a smoother experience for the customer. It's happening in the background. They don't have to take an action. And so whilst there was no net effect, it does make it better for the customer. Essentially what we've done here is make the bounce series slightly less effective. And so this is where we need to test going forward. How do you run those things in parallel to make sure that they are both working for you? This is probably our biggest success story of the year, and I like it because it's a very good graph. So this is all around how we have prevented cancellation from happening. So obviously we've talked about kind of that initial experience that people have with us and working on who we are bringing in the first place. But then we were finding that a lot of our trialists were churning off. And this initiative really came in around the COVID bump. So obviously we had a lot of people come in March, same as everybody, I think, March, April. We saw obviously an enormous increase in acquisitions. And we were really conscious that in 12 weeks time, we were going to start to see more churn, simply because there were more people on the file. And so we introduced a range of initiatives through customer service, through our agents, and through my account to make sure that when people indicated that they wanted to cancel, we tried our damnedest to save them. So we introduced various incentives for agents. We retrained them on sales rather than service. We began to basically reframe it. We put a lot more people onto live chat. And then in the next slide, you can see here that we also changed the way that our My Account, we introduced an online cancellation journey where live chat is embedded the whole way through that journey. So we can have those live conversations with customers and try and stop them from leaving, try and address their problems. And so this graph basically shows where our contact is happening. So you can see, especially over COVID, all of this gray is email. And email is a dead channel. You can't, once somebody has emailed you to cancel, there's very little you can do. Whereas increasing the amount of phone, the blue, and chat was really, really key for us. And then the blue is a very controlled experiment that we've been doing on online cancellations. So not everybody sees that, and not until we are super confident in how we are saving people will we release this to everybody. What's been really interesting for me, especially in my experience, is that previously I've always thought that phone was the best way to save people, whereas what we've actually found is that our save rates on live chat actually exceed phone now, which is good news for us because you can obviously manage more than one live chat at a time, so you make it more efficient for the business and better for the customer. Phase two. So again, this really kind of comes back to engagement and where we have been focusing. So this graph basically shows our subscribers with any usage in the last 2 weeks. Everybody will have different metrics for engagement. Everybody will track different things. Given that we are predominantly a weekly publication, although we do also publish daily online, we look at usage in the last 2 weeks as an indicator of retention. So the core thing here is understanding the engagement that we have with our subscribers, but also what we need. How engaged do we need them to be for retention to be good? And it's not the same for everybody, right? Different cohorts will engage at different levels. Some people may be completely happy to dip in and out of your product once a month. Some won't feel that they are getting value unless they're using it every day. So it's important to apply that first pillar of retention to your engagement by understanding the segments of subscribers that you're dealing with. And really what we've done here, just to, I guess, give a few tangible examples, is around in-life. So really kind of thinking about that in-life communication. We now have usage series of emails that go to customers depending on how much they've used. And if they haven't used enough, then we prompt them and we give them indications of articles they may have missed or things that readers like them have seen. And again, this is where editorial really come into play because those emails are so much more effective when they come from your editor or appear to be editorial recommendations versus just your algorithm telling somebody that they haven't read a certain article after the summer dip as well. And the final part around driving engagement, and again, coming back to my point about adding value into the subscription, is really kind of what else we could do. So we took advantage of COVID and launched digital events. Now, this is something that I've done in previous retention roles, but is really difficult to scale. Because obviously you are, putting on a live event for your subscribers is very expensive. Putting on live events for live digital events, much less expensive. And this has enabled us to reach many, many more subscribers than we would have thought. In fact, we ran an event with Bill Gates, which I think had roughly a stadium's worth of people register for it. I think we had upwards of 40,000. You can't do that in real life. So we have been able to kind of use COVID to create something quite engaging for our subscribers. And we've also launched our subscriber-only newsletter cover story, which gets behind the gets behind why we've chosen our cover this week, which obviously we're quite well known for. But I think this really what I'm trying to highlight here is just convincing people internally of the value of doing subscriber only things and really kind of adding that value into your subscription package to make the expense worth it, if that is one of the reasons that you are often given for people churning.
Thanks, Claire. That was awesome. And not surprisingly, some few questions are coming in for all speakers, but for you particularly, I have a question for you before we move on, and we'll have many more questions later on. This comes from Kimberly. She says, how do you manage digital activation of print subscribers? Is digital access activated upon initiation of subscriptions or a separate process?
It's a great question, and the answer is we've changed it. When I joined, a subscriber had to come back on and activate their digital access. That's cumbersome, and it puts the onus on the subscriber, which just isn't ideal. It adds another level of friction to their journey. And so we removed that. So when somebody subscribes, they get their digital access automatically, and they simply need to come back on and reset their password. So so they have that access from the moment they subscribe. Removing that friction is really important. It's important to remember that the friction isn't just during the acquisition journey. It can occur afterwards as well.
Yeah, it sounds like your team is very responsive. When something doesn't work, you move on to, the next strategy. That's great. One more question before we move on, and that is from Dan. He says, do your customer service team contact inactive subscribers during the subscription term in an effort to prevent cancellations at the renewal date?
Yes, but not by phone. So depending on the channel that you're referring to there, Dan, we don't, our customer service team don't, because we wouldn't want to, I guess it's quite intrusive to call people up and try and get them to become active. But that is essentially what our usage feed does. So essentially the usage email series there is exactly that. It identifies people who are inactive and it emails them with articles that they may be interested in. There's lots more we can do in this space, push notifications, various notifications on the website if you're coming on but not reading anything. There's a lot more to be done in this space. So I think the answer is yes, but not via the customer service team.
Very good. Well, thank you, Claire. That was great. And stand by for some more questions at the end. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Matt Lindsay, who is the president of Mather Economics, the preeminent data analytics firm in worldwide in the subscription space. So take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you to the speakers and for FIP for hosting us. It's hard to follow those guys, but I'll do my best. Really, in the interest of giving plenty of times for questions at the end, I'll try to keep this fairly brief. I know they've covered a lot of tremendous points, and this will be shared later on, so I won't tell you more about us, but there are a couple of things I'd like to talk about today. Really more of perhaps the analytics side of churn and retention specifically around price elasticity and price optimization for subscriptions, churn propensity modeling, and then some tactics that we've found that are effective. So just as you recall from your economics classes way back when, there's demand curves that slope downward, and that essentially reflects the price elasticity that your markets have. Many subscriber organizations will have very few price points, and so they have this horizontal line at the top there reflects the number of subscribers they have at their base price, and then they have some people that are paying their promotional offers to the right, which are lower pricing. And what we find is that you can see this hypothetical demand line there, that's the dashed line. You'll ultimately have people that are, you're not charging as much as you could, and then you have people where that incremental step from the promotional offer to the full price is really more than they're able to or willing to pay at that moment in time. So there's some price related churn that occurs in a normal subscriber life cycle with respect to the typical pricing. We use a term called price elasticity that's common, but we've adjusted it slightly for the subscriber business here. But if you essentially, as in all elasticity combinations, it's a percentage change. It's the ratio of the percentage change in quantity over price, percentage change in price. So if you have a 10% price change and you lose 1% of your subscribers incrementally, that would be a 0.1 elasticity. And this is just an example here where if you look at subscribers at a point, 2 points in time, and you have one group that has no price increase, they'll go from point A to point B with their normal levels of retention. Then if you do have a price increase, you'll go from point A to point C. And so that the difference between points B and C is what we can attribute to pricing, the effect of price on churn. So we can make some predictions around price elasticity by customer. And to the points that Claire and Selma have made is that price elasticity varies pretty dramatically across your subscriber base. Tenure is a big factor in that. Engagement is another. Household income is a third. But there's others that play a big role we're conflating in some cases price elasticity and income elasticity, which are slightly different, but in effect, they have the same result, which is their different responses to a pricing action. But if you look at the distribution of a renewal price elasticity, and again, I'll draw a distinction between acquisition elasticity and renewal price elasticity. At a renewal pricing event, you can see that there are people that are very low elastic customers. Which is a very minor response to price, and you have people that are very, very elastic, or they have a high elasticity, and those are people that have a very significant response to price. So if you have this insight, you can have a much more scientific, or I would say sophisticated strategy to price. So instead of everybody getting the same price increase, it's possible to give differentiated pricing based on some individual's relative price elasticity. And you don't have to do this at the individual level. There's different levels of implementation, and I can talk through that. But just to illustrate how effective this type of insight can be, this is an A/B test with one of our clients where we asked them, they had an annual increase every year of approximately 5 to 10%. And we asked them at one point, just have a holdout group where we took a stratified random sample that was representative of their subscribers. And we asked them to just hold them out of the price increase. And what we found was that the customers that received an increase they were I only have 3 or 4 colors, but the lighter blue in this chart here, that was their churn, and then the people that got the increase had the churn on the dark blue histogram stack there. So what you see is that the incremental stops due to the price increase is very different across tenure. So people that are in their first year had over a 9% incremental stop rate due to that price increase, while people that were in their 5th year or greater actually had less than 0.5%. So very, very significant difference in price increase response to a price increase. So how do we implement or activate that? And I mentioned earlier, we help publishers, and you can either implement this insight at the product level, a segment level, or an individual level. And in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail there. However, there is a trade-off between efficiency and granularity. So you can do less granular pricing strategies, but you will trade off some return on that. But there's in that optimal mix between complexity and return varies for each organization based on your own business. But the ROI can be significant. This is just a quick example of how, if you were to compare a more targeted pricing strategy at renewal to an across the board, you can yield a tremendous improvement in the actual net incremental revenue from a price increase. In this case, it's about 20 to, in some cases, it could be even as high as 40 or 50% greater. And the way you accomplish that is by really minimizing the number of stops. It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your pricing stops will come from about 20% of your customers, and you can identify them in advance and give them some other type of increase or some other communication that's usually effective. I'd love to shout out to Abby Spooner at Dennis. She's, I believe, on this webinar today. She was one of our speakers, and she is actually, her organization's doing a tremendous job with pricing, and they're have really developed this internally on their own. And it's so another case study of someone that's doing this well. So this is just an example of how with pricing management, you can maintain this. If you have a legacy print subscriber base and you want to sustain that asset as long as possible, this type of pricing can really help you maintain revenue for a long period of time by increasing the rate to offset reductions in print subscribers. So just moving right ahead. So what we often find when people do pricing is that their next question is they're pleasantly surprised that, you know, pricing is a relatively small part of churn. And so the question becomes, well, what is churn? What are the factors? And what we've found are many of the contributors that Claire and Selma have spoke about. Many of them are just are friction in the payment process. Some are changes of engagement. We've looked at content analytics, and we find that there's different, depending on your publication, there's an optimal mix of quantity versus quality with respect to content. And so what we found is that there's, if you look at these factors, these are elements that are decreased churn risk. So they're inversely correlated with churn. And then you have factors that are positively correlated. Many of these are different factors. Some of them are just payment methods. Like if you have auto pay, that removes the friction of some of the payment process. You'll have some that are product related, like they're increasing their frequency of delivery. And if there's a varying delivery options, sometimes it's term related, and sometimes it's acquisition channel. So what we find is that you can score customers on churn. And what we've really found is that the really time to have a proactive retention campaign is for people whose churn risk suddenly changes. So we're looking at deviations from prior patterns to initiate a retention campaign. And so I'll just touch on a couple of these. We found that we've tested with different publishers, different types of tactics. One are, I will generally consider them financial incentives, where we proactively give them some either a gift or something that has a value, and they are effective in the short term of mitigating churn. However, what we found is that in the longer term, they really don't ultimately, they're not effective. In this case, with this example here, 9 months later, the people that received the gift card actually had worse retention. If we do something that's more what I'll call relationship building, which is where we send them a gift card or a value letter, a greeting card saying, thank you for your subscription, we often find those are more effective and much cheaper. So it makes the threshold of false positives much less expensive, so you can afford to send them to greater numbers of people. And those generally have to be what we consider, viewed from the customer's perspective, as authentic. So they have to be genuine, they have to be consistent with their brand, and they have to connote that there is a genuine relationship and concern there. So we often will test different types of copy. And you can see here, we're comparing the greeting card and the value letter. Both were effective. We've tested email campaigns. These are just some retention impacts. Again, just the things that come across as really authentic and genuine, such as a value letter from the publisher or the editor. Those are also very effective. We do find, though, that you need to have some innovation, that you can't send the same letter twice. You need to have a series of things that you can do and have the next one ready in the queue for a particular customer. And this is just showing that if you do look at churn groups and we put them into deciles, people that are in the top decile here respond the best to these types of retention campaigns, which you would expect. My last real slide here, this is just showing how engagement, different channels will tend to acquire. And I actually shared this on our last VIP webinar as well. So my apologies on the duplicate slide, but I felt it was relevant. Engagement is a big factor in retention. And what we find is that when you have customers that are coming in through different channels, they tend to acquire or bring in customers that have different levels of engagement. People that are coming in off of a premium content article, like Selma mentioned, or Claire, that they really just want to read that one article, they're a much more challenging retention effort or subject than someone that's hit a meter where they've perhaps read 4 or 5 articles in a 30-day period, and then they've subscribed. They're obviously much more engaged at that point. And then the best people are actually people that have taken action on their side to come to you directly without even having to go through a meter or a paywall. They're people that will actually say, click here, or they come through a newsletter and subscribe. Those people have expressed, they've kind of signaled that they're very engaged because they've taken the initiative to subscribe on their own. So looking at this first weeks of, we often will look at the first week of behavior from a customer as in addition to the channel they come in on, and we can put them into different recommendations for behavior, or onboarding series that kind of reflect their starting out level of engagement. So I think that's just all the comments I wanted to make there. Again, just wanted to say thanks to everybody, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Well, thanks, Matt, so much for that really great trove of data that really shows us what's really happening out there. And because you work with so many clients, could you maybe give an overview of the few greatest strategies that your clients or those out there in the media world have adopted that are working really well right now in the space of retention?
Well, gosh, I mean, the speakers today are both doing phenomenal work. I think that the key indicator, the key kind of is you're starting out. I think that the first greatest, step you can take is to move away from one size fits all to, even if you just have 2 or 3 levels of customization. I think that on the margin is the biggest improvement people can have. And it doesn't take a tremendous amount of investment in technology or anything like that. It's really just kind of getting the data together and segmenting based on a few observable characteristics.
Yeah.
So keep it simple. I'll stop there, I guess.
That's right. That's right. Well, Matt, stand by, because we're going to ask a bunch of questions now and see how the different speakers can answer these questions. There's a lot of questions that are kind of all over the board. So let me get started. One question is from Catherine, and she says, if you were starting from scratch, which I suspect many of the people who are participating today are starting from scratch or from an early stage, you have no legacy systems. What systems besides maybe CMS and ESP would you invest in first?
I was going to say start with Selma if they've been doing subscriptions for a shorter amount of time. I mean, those are the major two, right? The CMS and your email service provider are the 2 most important things that you could use. But I would also say your ability to A/B test. So whether or not you need to choose a separate tool to do that, or whether you have your own functionality. But I would say A/B testing is super, super important. And then finally, it would be your ability to do kind of propensity modeling. Either, again, you have a data science team internally that can do it, or you outsource your modeling. But either way, those are the key things for me, I think.
Thanks, Claire. How about you, Selma?
I completely agree with everything that Claire just said, and I would probably add to that a good user data system is really important. We use Google Analytics for example for a lot of our user data. That's not doesn't just matter for retention. It's really it's also a major question for acquisition too. So making sure that you have your user data ideally in one place, right? So that's one challenge that we had, that our user data was scattered all over the place in all kinds of systems, and then bringing it together is always a challenge.
Yeah. How about you, Matt? What are your insights on that?
I think, again, we look at the use cases and then work backwards from there. So if you're trying to implement, a personalization campaign with emails, you can have a way to monitor behavior and a churn propensity score. Those are things you can set up and then activate through an email service platform. I mean, it's usually it's not, there's different tools that are out there that have different, capabilities or enable different actions. We're intentionally kind of agnostic as to what tools people use, but I would really just say put the use case at the front of that decision and work backwards. Thinking about what analytics support that, what data you need for those analytics, and then what tools do you need to actually act on the insights.
Yeah, great. And now Christoph asked another question. He says, beyond price, I'm curious about the speaker's thoughts on the kind of experience and not just excellence at the level of the articles they are looking to provide that supports retention and a greater user experience. Selma?
Sure, I can take that one. We actually, in the survey that I mentioned in my presentation, we actually asked our subscribers what kind of additional perks they would like to see with their subscription, and a fairly large number actually said none. I just want to read your articles. But then a lot of them did say that they were very interested in kind of engaging with the authors on the content, especially with some of that very deep industry expertise in our tech and finance editorial teams. So webinars with our journalists are really successful. And then partnerships with other publishers. So bundles are kind of a tricky proposition. I think in the last year we've seen a couple of bundles come together and then not necessarily work long term. But that is another another kind of wish that our subscribers express, is that they tend to read not just one publication but several, and smart partnerships could be a really good way forward. Great.
Now, Matt, what have you seen out in the industry in terms of what kind of user experience beyond, the ultimate value of the articles and the journalism? What else have you seen out there that's a demand by the potential subscriber?
We've seen kind of a re-examination of different ad-free options. I think one of our publishers has a lot of their subscribers that they can tell are running ad blockers, and so they're experimenting with an ad-free subscription. Those have been tried in the past. There's kind of an arms race between the ad blockers and the ad tech, and so. But I think if that may be one experience, we find that it's really site speed. So I don't think people necessarily object to the ads per se. It's really just the performance of the site. So I think there's been some studies that show site performance has an impact on retention or engagement.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that too, the latency issues. Claire, what have you seen besides just the value of the journalism?
Yeah, I agree. I echo a lot of, unsurprisingly, what Selma and Matt have said as well. I think for me, it falls into two categories. I think there is enhancing the journalism. So certainly the webinars with our journalists, particularly actually that's been interesting how well that has worked for us, given that we don't have bylines. And so the ability for our users to connect with the writer in a way that they don't have another way of doing that has been really interesting to see how well received that's been. So I would say, even though the question is about what else beyond the article, I would still say stay in the realm of journalism for adding value. And then the second half, I think, is really around that user experience. So for example, we've just introduced things like perpetual login for a subscriber. Don't log them out. It's so small and seems like not the biggest thing that would impact your experience, but just that one little bit of friction that means you have to log in every time you come from a social article or wherever is just another layer of friction that you don't need to have in your customer's experience. So just kind of identifying all of those little things that would annoy you as a user and getting rid of those.
Sure. Okay, speakers, what about this one from Michael? He says, what about, do you think that if customers had the ability or option to pay on an article by article basis, that this may address some of the retention losses due to pricing or single article readership? Claire, why don't we go with yours, since you're bobbing your head in the
grinning. Yeah, so this was a debate I had in my previous news company before The Economist, a long running debate with my boss, who was adamant that an article by article was not a subscription, and therefore it didn't matter whether you retained customer, they weren't going to be a subscriber anymore. So I think, but ultimately you have retained the customer's interest and you have retained their engagement. So I think it is a really interesting one. I think if it keeps them in your ecosystem, it is worth it, but it is never going to be the revenue spinner you need it to be. And ultimately they are not a subscriber anymore. They are not giving you revenue on a recurring basis. So it depends how you are going to use it as a tool. If it is to keep their engagement, to keep them in your ecosystem, great. but just be careful with it.
Yeah, sounds very definitive. Selma, what do you think?
Completely agree. It's an interesting discussion that keeps coming up. And so I think once someone in our industry starts doing this and gives users the option to go to the virtual newsstand, if you will, and pick up that day's newspaper and not pay for a subscription, and if users start actually doing that on a in great numbers, then it's probably going to create pressure on every publisher to do this. But right now, as Claire said, they're not subscribers. I mean, if you get the price point right, and if we could sell one article for, I don't know, $3 or $4, that would be fantastic. But then what would that do to our long-term subscription revenue?
Hi, it's James here. I just wanted to say that's been tried a few times as well. I mean, there have been services like Blendle that have come along and tried article by article. The evidence so far is that consumers just don't want it. Or, you know, there's no...
Well, it's a faff, isn't it? Imagine that you have to go to a different, you know, it entirely depends on the platform. And I agree with Selma. Like, I think if the industry came together and found a way to make it customer friendly, then fine. But I don't think it's in anybody's interests really to do that. So
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The only case I've found that it makes sense is if you use it as a way to get someone to register with your site. You're almost giving, you know, you use it as a sales lead channel. But I agree, it's not a significant revenue stream on its own. So.
Yeah. All right, moving right along. I have a question that might be good for, at least for Matt to start with, from Dirk Jan, and he says, how do you determine which customer can cancel online and who not, based on probability to retain?
So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question per se, but you know, we do generally find that there's giving people the ability to cancel, make it somewhat flexible is a good thing. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but generally having that flexibility is good. But we do have propensity to subscribe churn models. So I may defer to Claire and Selma as to how they handle those cases.
Claire.
So from our side, at the moment we have our online cancellation journey rolled out to 12% of the audience. We're re-platforming a couple of different bits, and in November we will go live to everybody to allow them to do it. I think if we see churn fall off a cliff, then we may revisit who can use online cancellation. The underlying principle, though, is we want customers to have an easy experience with us that is a good experience. And if you make cancelling difficult, then they're less likely to come back. So as counterintuitive as it is, and as much as you need to hold your nerve, I think you need to allow a cancellation experience to be as good and as easy as possible, whilst keeping an eye on quite how much it's harming your churn.
Yeah. Selma.
Yep, I've again completely agree, and I've heard a lot of other publishers say this. This kind of this topic keeps coming up at events like these, and some publishers make it really hard for their subscribers to cancel. We've always Business Insider subscribers can always turn off auto renew when a toggle with a toggle in their account. And I agree, it's just aggravating for a user, and if they've decided they want to leave, then they probably will. So
yeah, you know, the issue of price comes up every single webinar, and I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about price elasticity. Julie asked the question, what measurements to define successful price increase elasticity? Is there a median for what works for most? And I thought maybe, excuse me, Matt, might be good to start on the issue of price elasticity. Excuse me.
Sure. I mean, we find that we have lots of benchmarks for different price elasticity. You know, subscriber businesses are usually have lower price elasticities than other businesses, but we also look at the yield. So what we call the net to gross ratio is kind of a esoteric metric, but what we find is that if you have a 10% price increase, but your average rate per customer goes up by 8%, after all of the stops and customer service activity with retention offers and things like that, we would consider an 80% net to gross ratio a phenomenal result. Usually it's around 75%. We find custom publishers that are very aggressive on price increases, that actual yield will go down pretty dramatically. And so you're really not helping yourself in too many cases. There's diminishing, you kind of diminishing marginal returns to higher price increases. So that's one metric. I know there's a lot more to say there, but I'll hold it there. Happen to ask, give more information on an email later on if that would be helpful.
Claire, how do you handle price elasticity?
So we're relatively fledgling here, I would say. We have a pretty one-size-fits-all approach to any kind of price increases or how much our product costs for people. I alluded to the fact that we are replatforming in November. It's something that we're going through right now, and I can't imagine that will stay the same in the future. I think everything that Matt presented is super important, and understanding kind of who you can get away with charging a little bit more, or how you step those price increases. And then there's a morality thing in there as well, right? Why should some customers pay more than others? And it's important to be able to balance those things off against each other and be able to look yourself in the mirror as a brand.
Yep. Selma.
I would add to that retention pricing is a really attractive tool, because you can play around with special offers, with win-back offers, without hurting the price point that you're showing to the world, right? So our $99 annual price point is something that we don't want to lose that perception in the market. So we try to run not too many discounts, but then on retention pricing we're a little bit more aggressive.
Great. Now, just in the interest of time, even though we have tons more questions, we'll try to answer those offline, but I will go around the room with one last question. This one comes from Benjamin. He says, how do you measure the success of single retention measures, such as additional emails or digital events? Do you want to get started with that, Claire?
Yeah, it's tough. So there are a couple of different ways that we do it. So the first thing is a control group, of course. You invite some people, you don't invite others. You email some people, you don't email others, and you see what it does to both engagement and retention. And that feels, again, quite counterintuitive if you genuinely believe it is going to do good things for everybody and it's going to make everybody stay on the file better. But you have to be able to see the difference. And then the second thing that I would say is important to do is to know what you are looking for. So for example, if you know that a 10 percentage point increase in your engagement, in a customer's engagement, equals 1 percentage point in improvement in retention, then that's what you're looking for. So even if you can't match it back, if you can say that you have increased your entire base's engagement by 10 percentage points versus the control group, then you can say that you know that it should have had that effect, even if it is harder to see in the numbers. Retention is like a magical art and science combination, and it's never going to be clear cut like it is in acquisition, and that's the fun of it, right? That's why we quite like it, because you can try all of these things and never really quite know which one of them made the impact, whilst knowing that all of them are the right things to be doing for your customers if they are driving up engagement. Like, such a fluffy answer. I'm really sorry. That's not actually particularly helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Matt, what do you think?
I completely second what Claire said. I don't know if I can add more value there. I think A/B testing is kind of the gold standard, or multivariate testing, however you want to characterize that. That you can do some econometric modeling where you can capture data and you can do regression analysis after the fact. That's another method, but yeah, those are really the ways we look at how do those incremental factors affect retention.
Great. Okay, Selma, last word.
Okay, I would say don't forget to look at the very simple things. We sent a value email to all of our subscribers explaining just a couple of bullet points on what they were getting with their subscription. And some of us thought, well, that's basic. They probably know that if they signed up. But turns out that one email actually really made a difference.
Terrific. Well, thank you, speakers. And please take some moments to look under the Q&A section, because some of those questions are addressed specifically to individual speakers. And please accept our sincere thanks for joining us with your wisdom. And now I'm going to pass the baton to James. Thank you all.
Yes, big thank you from me as well. Thank you very much to Claire and Selma, and of course to our regular guests, Matt and Martha, for another fantastic masterclass. That was part 3 of 3. Reminder that if you've attended all 3 of them, you are eligible for your certificate, and we'll be sending those out in the next few days. Some very quick bits of housekeeping. The session recordings for this masterclass and the preceding 2 are all on YouTube. The YouTube channel is FIP World. If you've not looked at it, please do go in there and you will find these 3 masterclasses as well as the other FIP Insider webinars that we've done over the past year. And those of you who've been asking about the slides will be sent to you. Look out for an email with the link very, very soon. If you've not already done so, please do go to fip.com, sign up to the newsletter. You'll get information then on forthcoming events like these webinars that will be happening over the next few months. The next one of these will be in the first week of November, where we're probably doing a webinar on sustainability focused around a report we did with UPM, and we will be back in our studio home at the Kenton Theatre in Henley for that. And keep an eye out as well before Christmas for the launch of FIP TV, our new weekly web television series, which will feature all sorts of different things going on, different guests and different conversations, all of which will be very interesting and useful. In the meantime, though, thank you very much to all of you for hanging on for an extra 20 minutes for this session. I know it was worth it because we got some really great questions, and of course we had some fantastic presentations today, so it only remains for me to say thank you very much to all of our guests, and thank you to all of you for attending, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you and goodbye.